Hello and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. It's lovely to be able to. Do you think it's important on that really weird interruption of my brain and thought and flow and mind? Would you personally like to have an opportunity, an option to make your life a musical? Do you think that would be something that you would have fun? Because the thing with TikTok now, everyone sadly thinks that they can sing or they can make up lyrics or and of course there are some people who are massive stars and got massive breaks on TikTok or thing. But sadly for every one of those, there are the masses who just make these things on Instagram, like copying those dances or copying those things. And sadly kids do it and then they're rewarded by people on their family groups. Like, wow, amazing effort, amazing talent. No, it's pretty shit. And then you give them false hope that they have a talent, which they clearly don't. And then they go through life thinking that they're good at something when they really aren't. And then, when they actually are pushed into the world saying, go try it out, get on this talent show, or even in school on a smaller scale, they get totally shat on. And it's, they pretty much very quickly realize that they're pretty shit at most things in life. And if that doesn't push you over the edge, then, so the point is, it's not the kids alone, it's the surroundings, the support system that lies to them. You can be anything you want. No, you can't. You can be very few things and try doing that well, or even try doing that decently, or at least try working on yourself so you can attempt to do that decently. Don't fucking go lie to these kids saying, oh, you can sing. Anyway, so having said that and going down that little path of being a little dark, I think it might be fun just to have it as a laugh. Go to your office or wherever you work, your cubicle, and even if you don't have a good voice or a singing voice, I think that would be more fun than putting up this fake kind of reward system on TikTok or things like awarding likes or rewarding them with likes. Just like, it'll make for good conversation. Like someone walks in, and I don't know other languages, but like, hello, I've got the presentation for the morning ready. And I was like, shut the fuck up, you can't sing. At least it started a conversation. As opposed to, this conference calls or of your managers like, I think you're gonna get fired. And you're like, oh, I got you fucking the secretary. It just, doesn't it sound a lot less antagonizing as opposed to like, oh, you're going to fire me? Guess what? I've got some footage of you banging the secretary. I'm going to show it to your wife. That just sounds so, but if you make it musical, I think it's a lot more fun. I think it's a lot more, it diffuses the situation. The food here is shit and I'm at a dead-end job, but I'm doing it because I've taken them too many EMIs and I can't afford to pay them off and everything's on credit and I'm living from paycheck to paycheck under the false illusion that I'm in a job that's keeping me happy and moving me up the ladder. Hey, let's go header and then let's go better. Yeah. At least you can lie to yourself more melodically. I think I'm also very happy with one thing that I've realized is as I've crossed the 40 mark, the horizon, which a lot of people are like, it's bleak. Oh, there's no returning after you cross 40. Everything, your punch gets bigger, your dick gets smaller, your ego gets bigger, your reality, you face, your midlife, whatever shit they throw. It's been fun. It's been a few months, but it's been fun. But one thing I'm keen on doing as I go forward in my 40th, because one thing I realized is that my name on my passport was very different from the name I was going by. I mean, it's not like, oh, my name was Fred or anything like in the passport, but my name is Sandeep. But in my passport, my parents put my first name, and this is, I say my parents, I could have changed it, but it's easy to blame someone, as Thumbe Sandeep. Thumbe is my family name. That's the village or whatever, the area where my father's side of the family came from. And because we live in a patriarchy which dominates and completely ruins the opportunities of women, I've taken my patriarchal family name. Yeah. So my name on the passport is Thumbe Sandeep, and of course you can have a laugh or call it whatever you want, Tumbi, yeah. But Thumbe is what it is, and Thumbe Sandeep. But I think it adds a little more gravitas having three names, right? Tumbe Sandeep Rao. Now, if I ever take up the thing of becoming an author, which I might be very shortly, I don't think so, but who knows? I think Tumbe Sandeep Rao, it's a little funny for stand-up. Like, oh, welcome on stage, Tumbe Sandeep Rao. They're like, what the fuck? He sounds like a farmer. But I think in certain fields, nothing wrong before anyone gets fucking cheesed off. Farmers are good; they give us the food that we eat, or at least they sell it to the people who exploit them, and then they sell it to us for an inflated price, and we get like a lot of stuff that's been through rats and been through other kinds of warehouse where people piss on them. It's really nutritious. I think three names, even in stand-up, if I go back or when I do go back on stage, I think I'm going to go back as Tumbe Sandeep Rao. It's going to completely, undermine everything I've built on social media. The 5 people who follow me are going to be confused because I thought, you're SoapyRao, the SoapyRao show. Yeah, but that's different. SoapyRao still stands. The SoapyRao show still stands. But Tumbe Sandeep Rao, wouldn't that be cool? Mr. Tumbe Sandeep, Rao. I just feel if you get an opportunity, have a third name. Introduce it in some way. If you don't have a third name in your name, then I think you should just make up something. Like if your name is like Alka, or your name is like, Juhi, or your name is like, Varun, you should just add something. And I think take it up. Because I think a lot of people now, like my daughter has a middle name, which is not a family name. It's nothing to do with that. It's just a name that we have given her, which I think she will like. It's an option. Now, of course, I can't go around as Tumbe because my uncles have done that in the past, and that will completely be overshadowing my street cred. I don't want to take that away. I don't want anyone who's walked in my stride before. But I think Tumbe Sandeep Rao, that's what I'm going to be going forward as. And if you ever meet me on the streets, you're like, hey, Tumbe Sandeep Rao. And yeah, TSR for short. I think they are. It's always good because if you make a TSR, then the options are much more. The Sandeep Rao, like he's only the Sandeep Rao, yeah, or totally Sandeep Rao, or take that Sandeep Rao. That's TTSR. TSR also, if you're into golf, happens to be a driver by Titleist, a range of clubs by Titleist, or a range of woods and fairway woods and hybrids and drivers. If you're into that kind of thing, so maybe then I'll become a really good golfer soon. And then the TSR range is obviously my range, which Titleist never knew, but they've ended up making a line for the Sandeep Rao. Just saying. Anyway, before I go into a delusional rant and a false imagination world building exercise of I'm the shit and I'm all need to worship me, I'm going to talk about my guest today because she is someone who does powerful things using words. She's a copywriter who helps people come up with stories, whether it's their organizations, their small companies, their big companies, whether it's their brand, whether it's their personal journey, their business journey. And her name is Martha Barnard-Rae. She also is a co-host of the podcast, The One That Works For You, a podcast where, well, her co-host and her talk about how to live the life that works for you. Hey, that has a ring to it. Martha and I had a lovely conversation. I ended up, in fact, getting on their podcast as well, so that episode might be coming out soon, where you can listen to me on the receiving end. That sounded so wrong, but on the end where I receive questions from Martha and... I think I know. What's her name? Is it Fee? No. Liv. That's her name. So Martha and Liv hosted me on their podcast, The One That Works For You. So I really apologize for that delay in remembering your name, Liv, if you're listening. But anyhow, Martha and I had a fun conversation about many things. To name a few, about writing, about the power of words, about how... the whole landscape is changing with ChatGPT. What does that look like for writers, for copywriters, for poets, or the people in the language, wordsmith, the trade? And Martha also has a story about her diagnosis with ADHD and how she helps people make sense of that and how to navigate a world where it seems that attention and the attention economy is a huge one and everyone's trying to get your attention. How do you live life with ADHD in today's world? Just to name a few things, and there's a lot more that you will enjoy in this conversation. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Martha Barnard-Rae. And for you listening, I appreciate it as always. Till next week, goodbye, God bless, take care of yourselves, work on that third name. Cheers. Martha Barnard-Rae, lovely to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is really good to talk to a copywriter, even though that was my role in the past. But I want to understand from you, when someone looks at a copywriter it's typically in the space of advertising or marketing or branding. But I feel personally that there's a lot more to it, because when you are providing copy for something, it is such a important choice of words, and more importantly, understanding the idea that you are writing the copy for. And as a result, it's about communication. It's about influence of those words on the mindset of the listener, the viewer, the reader, whoever they may be. And it's a really powerful tool of telling that particular story, however short or long. It could be for a corporate profile, it could be for an ad campaign, it could be even for a tagline for a restaurant. It could be so across the board. But now with the technological revolution and things like ChatGPT, where there are such easy solutions to writing copy, whether it's your resume, whether it's a description for a podcast, or whether it's even an essay for a school paper. How do you feel that words are being perceived?
That's a really interesting way to put this question. Obviously, there's a lot of conjecture in my industry about, are the robots coming for us? Are we all going to be out of a job? That sort of thing. But the perception of words, I think it's a really insightful way to ask the question. I think that there are a lot of people who look at what a copywriter does and sort of think about that as like an add-on. It's like, oh, if we have time, we'll do it. But when that same person actually like works with a copywriter and gets an understanding of all the research and psychology and analysis that goes into writing it, they just kind of develop a bit more of a respect for that process. In terms of AI and, all the tools that are, all over the place right now, there's definitely a place for them, and I use them in my own business. But I use them more as a research tool, right? And the thing that as a copywriter that I can bring is that human touch, right? So, I mean, there's all kinds of, I was seeing like an ad the other day, a job ad for like a prompt engineer for ChatGPT that pays $500,000 a year. And I'm like, listen, sure. Like, I would love somebody to have that job, but I'm not concerned that I will then be out of a job, because there's just so much more that a copywriter can bring to a job than just like sort of spitting out the words. I'm sure I didn't answer your question, but I've always had a very strong affiliation for words and a strong connection to, why this word and what does this mean? And, listeners, we just recorded Sandeep's, an episode of my podcast with Sandeep. And you were saying when we were recording about how you used to, hear words and write them down and sort of want to know more about that. And I really, really resonated with that, because I mean, there's always going to be people that don't care about words, that don't think it's important, but there will always be people who are like, no, I know that this matters. And I think having a human being write your copy will eventually be like the premium product, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, I grew up in India, and there was a huge emphasis in my generation, my parents' generation, of speaking English, especially. And the emphasis was on learning the language well, speak the Queen's English, right? So, of course, writers like P.G. Wodehouse and that genre of writers were really sort of revered, and of course, for all good reasons. But now there's a huge revolution or a huge rise in taking back the regional languages, which I think in itself is great, because I feel when there is a kind of thing of, there is an insecurity of Indians when they don't speak English well, and it kind of is a chip on their shoulder, the Indian accent, and people are mocked in some ways. But, I want to think, because some of the best copywriters I've read about or heard about are the ones who don't really have, excellent command over the language, right? They might write it in one thing. So I want to maybe it's not a question, but it's a thought. How important is it to communicate in the language that you think in versus the language that you've learned?
Yeah, so I used to be an English teacher and I did an English degree at university. And so I am one of those people who is like wanting to point out mistakes that people
Mm.
make. But what I've also realized in the past few years is that that is like a bit of a shitty elitist thing to do, right?
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
if I say I'm having a discussion with someone over email or, online, and my point is so frail that my only weapon is to point out that they've used the wrong there,
Mm.
like then it's not really, it doesn't say anything bad about someone as a person if they're not speaking like quote unquote perfect English.
Mm.
And so have really dropped back that whole vibe in the
Yeah,
past
yeah.
few years. But I think too, like when I was younger, I worked as an English teacher in South Korea,
Mm.
and there was so much anxiety around the kids wanting to speak properly, quote unquote properly. And like, so the little kids would speak freely to me in English. And then the older kids, like when they got to a certain age, it was it was considered too shameful because they weren't saying it properly. So they just wouldn't speak.
Yeah,
And I wanted to be like, guys, you speak two languages. I don't. Like,
yeah, yeah.
it's so amazing when people have learned a second language or a third language or a fourth language, that to kind of, weaponize the idea of like perfect English is
Mm.
just like, it's just a tool of, you know, the colonialists, really. Even the term
Mm.
the Queen's English is
Yeah,
like, well, why should we be speaking the Queen's English? Right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that, yeah, that understanding that, people want to be communicated to in a way that's welcoming, inclusive, and the way that we speak. And like
Mm.
every big company is writing in a conversational tone now.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's from like, the Apples of the world to like whatever other big company. That's what we're doing because that's
Yeah.
how our brains understand things best. And that's how we get to know our client and vice versa, how our client gets to know us is just speaking like normal people.
Yeah, that's the strange thing when there's a certain standard, a certain bar that is expected to be met by everyone who speaks that language. Like now, if I try
Mm,
to write like a person who's an Oxford graduate in an English major, it's obviously going to
mm,
be the different, right? And maybe good or bad, I don't
mm-hmm,
know. But with
mm,
the way at least English has sort of progressed and evolved, is every country has its own version of English, from African
yeah,
nations to even within America. Like
mm,
a person from a northern state will have a very different tone from a person in a southern state,
mm.
like a
Well,
Texan
and same,
versus
I'm Canadian and it's the same. Like, we all
yeah.
speak English, but there's all different, regional slang and even like words that we use in Canada that they don't use in America. And, that's what makes us all interesting and different, right? If we're all speaking
Yeah,
the
and that's
Queen's
the
English,
beautiful
how
part
boring
about
would that
English,
be?
because it's the unifying language, and I feel it's never going to lose its role. But the
Mm,
adaptations of this language, I think, is perfect, right? Because that's what I think that's where we were stuck, where we had to speak the English that was judged right by the English speaking a person from England. But clearly
mm,
now that's changed, saying, you know what, it's fine to speak. And that's what brings your uniqueness out, right? As a writer, as a
yeah.
speaker, as a presenter,
Mm,
is if you can say, make peace with that and say, okay, you know what, um, don't demonize English, but at the same time,
mm,
embrace it with what you are comfortable with and not be shy and be ashamed of it. I think it gives the
mm,
possibility of so much more creative opportunity.
mm. Yeah, I always sort of say, like, when people are asking me how they should communicate online or whatever it is, I always tell people that, like, your communication style should tell your ideal clients, you are welcome here,
Mm.
right? So you belong here. This is for you. So whatever audience you're trying to appeal to, you want them to feel welcome. And that sort of very formal academic language is not welcoming. It's exclusionary. So it's, we're all, I think, heading in a more productive direction when we focus on a conversational tone.
Yeah, and the thing is, there is one school of thought, which is, of course, maybe where you belong, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, is that words are very impactful, and a word can really shape a decision, can shape an influence, an opinion can also shape a person's perspective. And the other school of thought is words are just words. We use them, and there are some comedians that are like, it's just a joke, it's just words. So how would you navigate that? Because on one front, you're telling a person that each word needs to be designed in such a way that it tells the message of your journey or your brand or your whatever you're trying to do. But then someone who gets upset by a word could say that word hurt me, or it's hate or hate speech. So how does one navigate? It's a pretty tricky path, right? Like to say in one front, when I write a resume, each word means something about what I am and my value to that particular reader of the resume. But then someone who's writing something like lyrics to a song will say, I didn't mean it in that context, and I'm going to, like, you have people taking back lyrics now, people asking authors or publishers of old authors like Roald Dahl or say Mark Twain to say, take that out because it's offensive, the words. And I just thought about this yesterday when I was doing something. Like, when Mark Twain wrote, he didn't write to offend a reader in the 21st century. He wrote what was the language of the day, which, whether it's right or wrong, is not my place to judge. But how does literature, if you want to call it, or how does words as a representation of literature adapt to today's climate?
I think it's really interesting because I have been reading Roald Dahl books to my kids, and they're great. And I always, and maybe I'm the type of person that that is too vigilant about this, but if there's something in it, like there's a lot of reference in Roald Dahl books in particular to like the shape of people's body, how fat they are, how not fat they are, how gross they are. And when I'm reading those to my kids, remove those sections because I think that the books should be rewritten. I don't know. But I do think that in each scenario, it's important for, the audience to be considered. In this scenario, I'm reading a book to my 6-year-old child, and I don't want my 6-year-old child to think, in our house, we say we don't make comments about people's bodies. And so I leave that out because I don't want my 6-year-old to hear that and then think that that's an okay thing to say. I also then will have a conversation about this is how people used to write. This is how people used to talk. These are words that people used to use. And this is, what's more acceptable now. So I'm very, I do think it's important to, when you're communicating, and I mean, you use the example of a resume. I don't think anyone's really getting offended by a resume, but if
they saw mine, they would.
If you're communicating, in a way that is hurting someone, and if that person that is hurt by that word, is bothered to the point that they're going to say something, I'm very happy for that person to speak up and to say that they didn't like it, or to say that they're offended. I think that I know there's a lot of sort of quote unquote PC police, and everyone, people are saying, well, we can't say anything anymore. And it's like, well, I mean, people have always been offended by these things, but they just didn't have the power or the self-confidence or the strength to say anything. I think it's also okay for people who have always felt, marginalized or whatever by that language to now say, I actually don't like that. The initial communicator makes that person uncomfortable, and it's okay for that person to make the communicator feel uncomfortable back.
Right.
That's what discourse is, right? That, it doesn't, if someone says that word offended me, and then I'm like, oh, you're offended by everything. Like, that's just, I mean, it's just not true. It's gaslighting. But it's like,
Mm.
if you're willing to put something out there, you do have to be open to like the discourse that's going to happen. And with the democratization of information and communication, like, so many more people have, the ability to speak up and be heard. And I
Mm.
don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good
Yeah.
thing to have those checks and balances in place.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I think, if you're willing to put something out and you say, I stand by this as my creation, as my piece, then you should be willing to be criticized for it. But my worry, or my, I wouldn't say concern, but my question, I'm questioning this thing of denying or protecting too much, because there are people now saying you have to put these kind of textbooks in, you have to take these textbooks out, you have to teach a certain curriculum which is inclusive and diverse. And I think there is, again, no pros and cons, but the
Oh yeah, there's lots of pros and cons
Hmm.
to, I used to be a teacher,
Yeah.
and it's important for people to see themselves represented. It's important for history to be told properly,
Mm.
right? So, I live in Australia. I'm Canadian, but I live in Australia, and only in the past few years have we started telling the truth about colonialism and what happened here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is important. And is it okay to like whitewash Australian history? No, I don't think it is. So
Mm.
it's, yeah, there are very important pros and cons, I think, to that type of curriculum.
Yeah, because I think what's happening. Of course, as I told you, in India now there's a huge call for pride in your own language, which is great, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
there are some great
Mm,
creators in every regional language, and we've got plenty of them. We've got plenty of languages.
mm,
But what I've noticed is happening as a result is, earlier English was the bad guy, right? Like, the city-born
mhm,
English medium educated person was seen as, oh, the oppressor. Like, where I wouldn't say it's so drastic, but there was a kind of, I wouldn't say like a grudge held against someone like me, because I'm a minority in India, like, where I think in English. I've gone abroad to
mm,
study. I speak the language relatively okay, and now it's the majority are these people who uh, present, they create, and it's great for diversity of content, originality of idea, uniqueness in creative expression. As a result, what I've noticed is that there is this jostling for my language is not better than yours, but needs more visibility in some way. And like, I live in the south, in a state called Karnataka, where the language is Kannada, and a lot of people, including me here, don't speak the one of the official languages, which is Hindi, which is spoken quite widely across the
mm,
country. And as a result,
mhm,
people in Karnataka are saying, "Oh, we need to take back Kannada and make sure Kannada is more visible. And why should we speak
mhm,
Hindi?" So,
mhm,
just as an example, while there is so much more diversity, there is also this kind of rivalry within the space. So, just to put that on a global scale, is, yeah, while English now was the bad guy, and again, it may be not so drastic and so dramatic, but there is this
mm,
interfighting going, when you do go too specific to your region. There's always this kind of like retaining my identity, and I'm going to be this. I'm not going to speak that language because it doesn't represent my culture. And I hear, to take that thought forward, like Indian children who are born in America, who are American Indian, are like, "Oh, I don't like white people. I don't like, not even white. I don't like American people." And I don't know what that means, because American is so
mm,
different, right? There are I
mm,
don't like them wearing a sari and dressing up as Indian, because I feel that's cultural appropriation. So it's so much noise when you try to
mhm,
go down in that rabbit hole.
mhm. I mean, it's so much noise, but it's also like, is it a problem if different groups are kind of wanting to stake a claim?
Mm.
Like, is that a problem for who is that a problem for? If
Yeah,
there
yeah,
are smaller groups that haven't previously had a voice and now
yeah.
they want to say something, who is that a problem for?
Well, I don't think it's the voice that needs to be. I think, yes, of course, groups that didn't really have representation need to be heard, which I think is just fair.
Mm,
But I'm talking about
mm.
on a social scale. What happens when everyone's just trying to protect their honeypot, right? Saying my language is better than yours. I'm only going to. I just feel it's not criticism. It's I feel that the cohesive kind of fiber gets worn out.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there are, you know, sort of standards or ways that we communicate. Um, I think the ways that we communicate are created within systems,
Mm,
and those systems are made to benefit powerful groups.
mm,
And I just don't see a negative side to people who are not in that powerful group having more of a voice.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, there's more noise, but also like we're all adults, and like anybody who doesn't want to engage in like that specific debate about like whether this language is better than this one, like they can choose not to do that.
Yeah, yeah,
And I will never say that like, no, I think we need less. I think we need fewer voices, because like that's what got us into this situation, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm on board with people kind of understanding their background and understanding language in a way that they understand it, and really resonating with that, and to the extent that like it's acceptable for them online to communicate in that way, great. If it's not acceptable to communicate, if they are working like in a business, to communicate in that way, that's, I mean, okay. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's all good. I think any examination of like, well, why is this the language that we all default to, and why
Mm,
shouldn't we kind of think about this one more? Because it's all about like who was in power and who was the person, what language did the people in power speak?
yeah,
and
yeah,
and so yeah, I'm happy for those discussions.
yeah. Now, I want to understand what your thoughts are on how we, as we go forward with more social platforms, social media platforms, communication platforms are being absorbed into an offline society where it's almost integral to the way we communicate and interact with other human beings. Where do you see language and communication heading as things like TikTok, Twitter, Insta Reels, Insta Videos, YouTube, Facebook, and more platforms like this? And there are also audio platforms which are like Fireside and
Mm,
Clubhouse. How do
mm.
you see language, communication, and maybe even the written word adapting to these things?
I think that, I mean, for one thing, I think it's very difficult because there's going to be a lack of nuance when we're trying to do everything in so few words. And there
Mm,
are some subjects that really require understanding of nuance and understanding of background information. And you can't just kind of like watch a TikTok about every subject and then kind of have an understanding of that.
yeah,
But the other thing that I have really noticed is like people, because they are trying to be so succinct on these platforms, are thinking about what is it that I want to say? Like,
yeah,
how can what I want to say get attention? Which words am I using? So I think in a sense it gives some more power to like those, individual catchphrases, or those hooks and those tools that we use to like grasp people's attention, which on a lot of topics I think is useful. But then on the other hand, like, there's so much nuance around even the discussion that we've just been having,
yeah,
that like, if somebody took 140 characters out of something you said and 140 characters out of something I said with no context, it's just so easy to misunderstand, either deliberately or not deliberately, what either of us was trying to say and use it as a weapon. So it's
yeah,
it's really hard because we are in a text-based society, like much more than we ever have been, which I think makes it puts a lot more emphasis on the way that a person writes and the way that a person communicates. But then there's also that thing of like, you know, so many things are being taken out of context deliberately or not deliberately to try to make a point. And it like, I feel really torn about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my problem, context being taken out, right? Because I've seen,
Mm,
I've read some tweets which are hilarious, right? Because the fact that someone's put
mm,
in all those um, extra words into just a few,
mm,
and
mm,
it really brings out a certain style of writer, and I think they really
mm,
shine. And even someone who makes a well structured, well scripted YouTube video, or even maybe a quick reel, it's a gift, it's a talent.
mm,
But my
mm, mm,
problem is that for those who can't do it, then they kind of try to get the sensational aspect of it. They try to go for the negative. They
yeah.
try to defame. They try to kind of do things that get attention, which is always not
Mm,
good. The subtlety goes, and I feel a lot of
mm,
times content which is subtle doesn't really get picked up, and then you just get
yeah.
exposed to one kind of content or one kind of narrative, which ends up leaning more towards the negative or the dramatic or the
Mm,
sensational, which is not
mm,
reflective of society. And then people get carried away
yeah.
thinking that's the normal, which is not really good
Mm,
for um, people who are viewing it constantly, because it's not one story, it's constant reel after reel, it's constant video after video,
yeah.
which is the same. And that's when you think, oh, that's how society is. That's how everyone hates everyone. Everyone hates this kind of person,
Yeah.
and that's not the reality, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I agree. It's really tricky. Like, I mean, again, that democratization of information is useful. And like, I want to know, you know, on certain subjects, what lots of people think. And then, but like, this is probably, you know, hypocritical, but then there are times when I'm like, I want to know what an expert thinks. I
Yeah,
don't care what like a
yeah,
person who does not know what they're talking about thinks. And it's that thing of like, you know, the news now, and I'm thinking in particular of like right wing news is like, well, we have to hear everyone's point of view. And it's like, but some points of view are just like, oh, I've read two articles, and some are like, I've done an entire PhD on this thing. And it can be really difficult, I think, now to know, like, is this blogger an expert or
yeah,
is this physician an expert? Like, and so what people are doing is like they're deciding who they're going to trust, which in one sense is like, I guess that's kind of good, but then in another sense it's like, yeah, but I mean, this, you know, if this person really doesn't represent like, you know, what the research shows, or so it's just, I agree with you. It's like, it's kind of good. There are good things and bad things about the way we're communicating online. It's
yeah.
scary and also empowering, I think.
And my concern is not for someone like you and I who are probably also connected offline, right? We have people we turn to
Mm,
for one-on-one, face-to-face conversations. We know where to
yeah.
get what information from. Maybe at some
Mm,
point we also are susceptible and vulnerable to kind of mass, kind of, algorithmic assaults where we only
mm,
kind of get one
mm,
kind. But I feel we have a little bit of the maturity, the emotional strength to kind of say, okay, this is where and why they're saying this. But for the generations like your children and my daughter who doesn't fortunately have a phone yet, she's only 11 months, and I plan to keep it that way for many years.
that's
But
good.
uh, for them it's
I'm going to
this
get
is a,
her a phone when she turns one.
oh, no, 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 no. She,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding, of
yeah, I
course.
mean, in the sense, you can't not be in reality with what everyone else is doing. But I mean, that's, I think, a conversation which we should have after this point, which I feel when this is the avenue of content being consumed for these generations, is it's very hard. I mean, they that's like, and I don't blame them, because that's what everyone their age is doing, right? It's the tablets, the phones, the computers, it's the YouTubes, the TikToks. And when that is the, and I want to rope in the other thing that you spoke about before we started recording, is when content is getting shorter and shorter, when everyone is demanding your attention. This concept of attention deficit is really, really a big thing. I mean, when everyone is trying to cash in on the attention economy, how does someone even try to stay focused on a thought, on an idea, on an emotion, on a feeling for longer than a few seconds?
So is this an ADHD question, or is this a question about
I mean, I just want to sort of tie it
about
in. I mean, we can talk about, we can take it in the direction of
yeah.
ADHD after, but
I mean, I think the thing is that, like, there is so much out there, and one of the things that where we need to be teaching, and we are teaching kids in schools, is about sort of being critical thinking, right? So if I've got a child and he's going to be 11 in May, and we're very like locked down on phones and all the things, and
hmm
he's not allowed to have any of that stuff.
hmm
And ultimately I know that eventually he will need to. But
yeah,
what we have tried to do in our house, like, he's very into reading, he's very, and I'm a big reader, and so in our home, we read and talk about books. And,
nice.
my husband and I foster that interest that he has. He loves Greek mythology. And so when there's something that he's into, we help him by buying him those books, or whatever it is that he wants.
Yeah,
And so I'm hoping that this understanding that he has, that, like, he can have interesting things in his life that aren't on a tablet or on a phone.
yeah,
I really hope that that will kind of continue through his life. After, he'll be starting high school next year. And yeah, I am quite addicted to my phone, and I'm nervous about, the prospect of giving my children a phone. But
mm,
I just kind of hope, like, the discussions that we have in the house, and all of kind of the work that we do to try and help our kids to know as many important things as they need to, and how to keep themselves safe. I hope that that will be enough, but, like, who knows, right? Like, it's just,
yeah,
even you and I are very similar ages. I'm 41, you're 40.
yeah,
We both, came of age in a time when, like, there was no Facebook, there was no internet, and you could do stupid shit and no one would know about it.
yeah.
And, like, our
I'm
kids are
so
just
glad.
not in that. Yeah, like, we're the last generation really to have had that. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of, like, have we protected them enough with, like, the things that we've provided and the support that we give them and the conversations that we have in our house, that,
hmm
like, when things come up, they will have the critical thinking skills to go, is this real? Is this a good idea? Is this kind? Is this fair? And then kind of, make a decision. I don't know, though, but you'll have to wait for a few years, and I'll get back to you and let you know how it's going.
Yeah, I need some tips as well, because I think, yeah,
Oh
you're right,
God.
because these are the things that we in some way didn't really grow up, right? I think many of us, yeah,
Mm.
did, and I'm not speaking generally for everyone our age, but I think kids this generation, your son's age, in some way are forced to grow up quicker.
I think they can be, like, so it's really interesting. So I live on the south coast of Western Australia,
Mm.
and Perth, Western Australia, is the world's most isolated city. And
Yeah, that's
I
where I
live
did my first and
450
only
kilometers.
stand-up festival in
Did
Australia.
you?
Yeah, I did the Perth Fringe.
Um, Oh, fun. I was at the Perth Fringe a couple months ago. But so we live 450 kilometers south of Perth,
Okay.
right? So it's very far from the whole wide world. And our kids go to this, like, school in the woods, and, like, they do, they learn the Australian curriculum, but they are kids, right? They're kids. And our son also is on the autism spectrum. So there's like that other kind of layer of like that emotional, he's very intelligent, but he's less emotionally mature than his peers. And it's just my goal to like preserve that as long as humanly possible. Because like I know kids, they do grow up, they are growing up faster. And that is, I think, really scary for parents, and the ramifications of that can be just like so wide, right?
Yeah, and you do want to protect him on these forums, right? Because not everyone is sensitive, or they don't give time enough to understand his to be even aware of his emotional needs or his emotional ability to process stuff. So, no, it is in some ways a kinder world, but it depends where they are exposed to. Because if it is schools, people are more aware. Like I notice now people are much more accepting of disability, or people, parents who in India who have children on the autism spectrum, they're able to talk about it more. They're able to share their concerns and get support. But again, where do you do that? Because if you go to certain forums online, the intolerance can really shatter your confidence. It can really make you rethink your faith in humanity, because it just.
But I think too, like those critical thinking skills again really come into play here, right? So if I had a child, I used to teach middle school, and so that was like grades 7 to 9. And if I had a student and like they found some forum online that made them feel bad, it's like, you know, what I would focus on is sort of like, does this make you feel good? What are you getting out of this? Like, are these people experts? And those real critical questions that we use to analyze any source online as an adult are things that do need to be taught, right? So, like when the kids start using the computer and, you know, start getting into the wide world of the internet, but those questions of like, whose voice is this? Is this a trustworthy voice? Is there any reason why I should believe what this person is saying? How does what this person's saying compare to like what about other things that I know, right? Like, so when you kind of push kids to ask those questions, how does this content, you know, interact with the things that I know to be right or true? And if they don't, then it's like, it's okay. The internet's so big. You don't have to go to that site anymore. And we can find something better. And so I just think critical thinking is so important. And those skills that like we learn like in English classes or language classes as a young student. I just say English because I grew up in an English speaking country, but like those analysis skills of like, who is saying this? Why should I believe them? How does this gel with other things that I know? Is there someone else I should ask? Like those skills and questions are so important for kids who are like getting onto the internet, but even just like going out into the world. Why should I trust this person? What do they know? How do I feel in my body are just so important for kids growing up.
Yeah, well said, I think. Yeah. You know, Martha, I want to ask you, you know, as someone who talks about this and someone who deals with it, can you explain to me what exactly goes through a person or goes on in the mind of a person who's dealing with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? That's ADHD, right?
Sure. Can I just tell you a little bit about ADHD before we start?
Yeah.
So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is a recognized condition in the diagnostic manual. And there are 3 kinds of ADHD. There's inattentive type, hyperactive type, and combined type. So you can have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder inattention type and not be hyperactive. And so this is one of the reasons why people are saying like, this name is not adequate, like it's not the right name for this condition. Because the truth is, we don't have a deficit of attention. We have too much attention and less ability to regulate that attention, right? So when I was only diagnosed with ADHD when I was 39. And it's, I mean, I can't speak for everyone with ADHD, but how can I describe it? Like, so you having too much attention means, like, if you're sitting down to do some work at your desk and you're like, okay, I want to do these 3 things. You are attentive to every sound, there's like hypersensitivity around like your body. So like this morning, I spent 15 minutes like taking this tag out of my jumper because it was like, I could feel it too much. Like I'm very aware of like the way, the way things feel, of noises, of light, and then also just really easily distracted. So if I'm working and I get an email and it's like, oh, it's Sandeep and he wants me to confirm my podcast interview, I will just go, oh, I better do that now because I don't want to forget, because I forget things all the time and I have a lot of shame around forgetting things all the time. And so maybe I'll go to respond to you straight away. And then I'll be like, oh, the other thing I wanted to do is like make that dentist appointment because I really don't want to forget that either. And then it's like 2.5 hours later. I haven't done the things that I want to do. Yeah, maybe I've done some other things that I needed, but because of the kind of, the expectation of like what a quote unquote productive day should look like, I feel awful because I haven't attained the goals that I set for myself in the morning. So ADHD is like this lifelong, I call it death by 1,000 cuts, where you have like these mini failures throughout the day. And then those failures kind of, my husband gets mad when I use the word failures. He's like, they're not failures, but that's just how I imagine it, right? You have these mini failures throughout the day. And so then when, my kids get home from school, I have sort of less in the tank, less resilience in my bowl of resilience to cope with the demands of parenting. So there's like that focus piece, and then there's the executive function piece, right? So executive functions are things that our brains do to help us negotiate all the things that need to get done in a day. But it also includes things like emotional regulation, right? So if I've had a day where I haven't gotten the things done that I really need to do, and after like 39 years of living with undiagnosed ADHD, I have internalized shame around that. I am much more likely to, get really upset if something goes wrong, like in the evening, right? And so emotional regulation, there's also like issues around sort of rejection sensitivity, and all of these things are part of ADHD, along with the other executive functions, things like task initiation, task completion, prioritization. And so it really, and this is like, in reference to our conversation about detail and nuance, right? This is a very detailed explanation of ADHD, but it's just easier for people to go, oh, so that means you can't focus. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, I can't focus, but it's just like the ramifications are so much wider than like, oh, I can't focus, so I didn't get this thing done.
It's not because you don't have the attention. It goes deeper than that. And people with ADHD have what's called an interest-based nervous system. So if I am interested in something, I can hyper focus on that thing and like be so much more productive. But we can't always be doing things that we're interested in. And so that is, it's really hard. And people will say, well, yeah, everyone's better at doing things that they're interested in. And, yes, they are, but not everyone has like a different brain composition wherein it makes it almost impossible for them to focus on something that they're not interested in.
So I spend a lot of time kind of explaining this to people, particularly after I did my TEDx talk.
Mm.
And I'm happy to do that. But it's, I think it's we're very tempted as human beings to just kind of go, oh, so that means this about you, when it's just so much broader than that one thing. I'm sorry if I really went off on a tangent
No,
there.
I think from what you told me, it sounds like almost you have this constant fear of missing out on an activity. So you try to do every activity, and the next thing you know, you're overwhelmed because you can't get any of the activities done.
And there's a real hypervigilance that comes
Mm.
up because you have messed things up in the past. Because there's like time blindness with ADHD, and also we kind of do not recognize the passage of time. So, like, even getting ready to do the podcast, I was like, okay, I'm going to finish the thing that I'm doing at 12, then I'm going to have lunch, and I need to set my stuff up. And I ended up rushing, and I was like, oh, why do I do this? And my husband's like, well, this is what your brain does. Like, so trying to just
Not
go
demonize
easier
yourself.
on myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And go like, oh, well, this is what I do, rather than like, why do I do this? Why can't I do this the normal way?
And that's something we connected with
Is tricky.
when we recorded earlier. Yeah, it's that that
Mm.
the power of shame is so strong. I'll give you an example. A few weeks back, beginning of the year, I was getting ready to go to the driving range, and I had to get ready. I had a lesson, so I had a quick shower, and the shower in my bathroom has a sliding glass door, right? And I showered
Yeah.
and toweled off, and I hung the towel, and just without, you don't think about opening the shower door, you just slide it, right? But clearly there was
Mm.
some defective wheels on it, or I hadn't checked, or I didn't see
Mm.
that it had broken. The entire shower door
Mm-hmm.
shattered, and yeah, it just like it was toughened glass, so it's designed to shatter on impact. The entire door fell,
Yeah.
shattered. A piece of glass took off my fingertip, and I'm standing there. Yeah, it was. I mean, so there's this massive sound of shattering glass. I feel a
Yeah.
sting. I'm butt naked. I'm
Yeah.
bleeding, and the first
Yeah.
thought that
This
went,
story's got everything, by the way.
yeah, yeah, and the first thought in my head, right? All this has happened. The first thought is not, get out of there, make sure you're safe. None of that occurred to me. The first thought is, shit, you broke a glass door, and I felt
Mm-hmm.
ashamed because
Mm-hmm.
that was my thing I've held on to for years. You've broken something. Because I couldn't see. I would drop stuff. I would walk into stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I was just like, "Are you crazy?" But the next thing is like, "Dude, you're naked." Unfortunately, that was the second thought.
Mm.
You know?
So then how do you, like, if you don't mind my asking, how did you get out of that without stepping on the broken
Yeah,
glass?
I'm surprised. You know what happened was, so the glass was shattered across the across the floor.
Yeah.
So I
Were you
did.
home alone?
Fortunately, the people at home, but I didn't call out until I got out of the bathroom. So what I did was, surprisingly, I had the presence of mind not to run and panic.
Mm.
So I kind of put pressure using my feet. Fortunately, I think this is one of those skills my body's developed over the years without me knowing, is
Yeah.
I could sense how
Mm.
much pressure I'm putting. So I kind of
Mm.
stepped on the glass without stabbing myself in the foot, reached over to the
Right.
hook, and I put on my boxers, and then went to the sink, and there was a piece of glass stuck in my finger. I sucked it out, washed it, but it didn't stop bleeding. Then I opened the
Yeah.
door, and I called out for my mom. And that was, again, the kid in me going, "Ma!" and I was just
Yeah.
dripping, and there was just blood everywhere. It was messy,
Oh my
but I mentioned it to you.
goodness.
Yeah, it was. And then I was like, "Oh, I'm going to miss my golf lesson," which, of course, I'm going to
Yeah.
miss my golf lesson because my part of my fingertips gone off.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
just to give you,
Yeah.
the example was more from the shame point, because I was like, "Oh, I broke glass."
Mm. Mm-hmm. And that, like, it's really interesting you say that, because I was reading a book recently called Your Brain's Not Broken by Dr. Tamara Rossier. It's a very good book.
Mm,
And she explains, so low frustration tolerance is also a trait of people with ADHD. And so she was explaining how, like, if I'm in the grocery store, I hate looking for things, and therefore grocery shopping is like my nemesis. If I'm in the grocery store and I can't find a thing that I'm looking for, my brain, because of like, I have a less functioning prefrontal cortex, my brain goes straight to a fear response if I
Mm,
can't find that thing. So it's like, what does this say about me? Even if like, they don't have it. Like it doesn't say anything about me. But my immediate thing is like, I can't find this because I'm shit at looking for things. I can't find this because my brain is this. And like it just goes straight to this fear response. And like if your brain thinks you're afraid or your body thinks you're afraid, you become afraid. And it's like, and so then you have this like over the top response to the frustration. And that was such a really interesting explanation to me, because I'm always like, well, why do I get so distressed about like little things? And it's that, you know, it feels like a threat, because am like predicting that like I'm the one that has messed up, and it feels like a threat to my own safety. And like it sounds the same as like when you broke the glass, like, oh my god, I broke the glass, I'm in trouble. It's
mm.
very similar. So I have these like responses to frustration that are just not reasonable, because my brain and my body kind of takes that as like something to be afraid of.
And I could really connect with you on that point, because it's so many things that I do as well, which starts with frustration and then escalates to,
Mm.
I wouldn't say panic, but a sense of anger, like rage, right?
Yes.
With yourself mainly, but it also comes out and people around you are like, why are you so angry all the time? And it could be like if earlier, like if we're going out as a family and I get ready late, I've taken a little longer to get ready, then
Mm.
there's this, oh I fucked up, right? Or like now when
Yeah,
my
yeah.
wife and I are going out and my wife is late, I'm just like angry with her because
Mm.
it's perceived as doing something wrong, and she's like,
Mm.
chill, we're going for dinner, it's supposed to be a good
Yeah.
time out, why are you?
Yeah, like it's just us. Relax.
Yeah,
I'm the
but there is this
same. I'm the same.
constant 0 to 100, frustration to just rage, which fortunately I'm able to kind of see through it in certain moments. But the default setting is is frustration to
Mm.
like it literally is, if you can't do something as trivial as where's the charger, or where's
Mm.
something that and that's why I think I've become like everything needs to be in a certain place, because if I
Mm.
don't find it there, I feel this reaction response starts triggering off in my body and
Yeah.
mind.
Mm. Mm. And that is, it gets harder, right? When you move in with someone and when you have a toddler,
Yeah.
like for the toddler to understand, oh, dad's frustrated because like he's looking for this thing that he put here, and like you were innocently playing with it, and but like it's really difficult. And as a parent, like I find myself kind of explaining to my kids like, oh, I think I'm really feeling frustrated about that because of da 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 da. But they're kind of old enough to understand that. But
Yeah.
if you didn't have this level of self-awareness and you're like losing your shit when like your little daughter moves something of yours,
Yeah.
that then puts your shame onto her, right? And
Yeah.
so it's just so important like that you've kind of done all this work, because
Yeah,
I
it's
mean
it's also
my
like the thing,
yeah.
Martha, is to add to your thing. It's when you feel like a failure for no reason. I mean, for everything feels like a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm.
if you stumble because you didn't see a step, or like my
Yeah.
wife and I go to a hotel and she walks ahead 2 steps before realizing, oh, and sometimes she's like, I genuinely forget that you need help. I'm like, great, right? We really.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like
Thanks.
rage building up, right? I mean, I've
Yeah.
worked on it and this thing, but I totally recognize where you're coming from, and you're right. Like
Mm.
if I you know if like for instance I bump my toe because there's a side table there, it's almost like this
Yeah.
like, how dare you do this to me, this the
Yeah.
injustice
Yeah.
of it all. And
Yeah.
it's crazy how the escalation
Mm.
is like literally in a millisecond. Like you're frustrated, next thing you're just raging at the world, going, people are such
Yeah.
assholes, no one understands me.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm constantly like, I hate everyone. And it like I get real like I work online, right? And
Yeah.
but I honestly, my husband thinks that I have like bad like vibes around electronic stuff because
Mm.
stuff just like doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I get so angry about it. And like, but it's that thing of like, I'm hyper vigilant. I want to do everything perfectly because I regularly mess things up. And if I mess this up, it says something about me as a person.
Yeah.
And that's just like something that I'm really trying to kind of let go of, and doing therapy and really trying to get to the bottom of that. And I mean, it's not all about having ADHD. It's like also the way you were raised and the world that we live in, and all of that
Yeah.
stuff. But just kind of understanding like, okay, if I want to not get ADHD burnout at the end of this year, I need to put some things into place to protect myself from that.
Yeah.
And like doing that, giving myself the grace to do that, rather than just going, no, you should be able to do this, and this. Like you should be
Yeah.
able to do all the things. But it's like, well, I can't. And
Yeah.
it's really tricky.
And when for various reasons we seem to have arrived at similar kind of responses to life in our environment. And I remember like 2018-19 when I went to this person I told you about, the Israeli guy who helps people with these states of mind. He said, you're in a constant state of high alert. You're waiting for the next threat. You're waiting when you're going to fall. You're waiting for when someone's going to say something to hurt you, or you're waiting for the next situation where you don't find something that you put, or you're not in control of the situation.
Yeah.
So you're constantly on edge, and that's just. And when something does happen, when someone does say something mean, or when you do trip, you're just you've expended all your energy in anticipation that you just collapse, either in
Well,
rage or
and you're like, I knew it. Like I
yeah,
knew that was going to happen.
yeah.
Right. And it's that I don't know if I believe in like manifesting. There's a lot of talk about manifesting, but
I'm not a
that
big
thing of
fan.
like, if
Yeah,
no, I know, good. But if you are constantly like, this could go wrong and I could fall, or I might drop this, or and it's like, well, I mean, is it more likely to happen if we're obsessively, because I feel that sense of hypervigilance all the time, right?
yeah. I'm
And you're
constantly flexing for
expecting
that
something to
punch
go
which never
wrong.
comes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you just
totally,
end of it, as you said, you just
totally.
get tired. By the end of the day, you're just exhausted in your own mind and body. Like, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, tomorrow let's start again. Who's going to say this shit? Who's going
Mm.
to? But that's why when he said, trust in
Yeah.
yourself and let go, figure out the stuff that you can do, stuff that is in your control, and you just got to let go, because the thing you said, that you have children, and I have a little baby, and the only thing that helps me get through is that, you know what, don't take yourself too seriously. Your shit ain't that important, because that
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
it's not that big a deal if you don't get things done, if your thing doesn't get recognition, if you don't get the attention you need, or you don't do something properly. It's fine.
But you know what? I also, I really take on board what you're saying, but I also think that like we are each of us entitled to our experience,
Yeah.
right? So if we're and I'm not saying that what you're saying is dismissive at all, but if I'm kind of saying to myself, don't take it too seriously, it's not that big of a deal, it is a bit like, I mean, it could be a big deal to me, right? So I
Yeah.
think we're all entitled to our experiences. It kind of comes out when like people talk about, trauma or bad things that have happened to them in their life, and people are like, well, someone always has it worse. Like you could be dying of this, or you could
Absolutely.
be da 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 da. And it's like, yeah, I'm not though. And so, but like what I'm trying to do is like deal with the situation that is happening in my life. And I just don't, it's not productive to me to go like, well, just think somebody else could have it worse, right? I
Yeah, and
think
I
we're
totally get that, but I'm not saying that you shouldn't give yourself that, because I think that's absolutely important. Like it's your life. You are allowed to enjoy certain things, get angry at certain things, and there's nothing wrong with anger or irritation. And you shouldn't say, you know what, I'm going to back off and only be in a state of zen because that's what suits my family and
yeah,
people around me. That's impossible.
yeah,
But what I mean by
yeah,
seriously is, if you give too much attachment to who you are based on that activity. Like in my case, if you say, if I play a bad round of bad session at the driving range, it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. So that's what I mean by
Exactly.
seriously. It's okay. It's a driving range. I would love to play well, but some days there are
Yeah.
good shots, some days there are horrible shots. But I'm not going to go home crying and feel like a failure
Yeah.
or feel like a piece of shit
Yeah.
because of that. And that's what I mean by that. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I meant by seriously. Because of course there are some things I will get angry about, and that's everything I've experienced and you've experienced in your life has made you who you are. Why should you deny yourself that, right?
Yeah, and I knew that that's what you were saying, but I always just like to let people know,
Yeah.
that it is okay to, feel strongly about things. And I think you're kind of what you're alluding to is like there are things in the world that like might feel like shitty, like having a bad day on the golf. What is it? The golf
The
links.
range. Yeah, the range. Or
Sorry.
yeah. No, but even
Yeah,
someone saying something mean, why
and
should I
then
take it on the chin, right? I can get upset and you can.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I always just like to let people know, like, you are what is happening for you matters. And
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that you are suggesting otherwise. Just like to
No, that's lovely. No, I like how this is progress from Chat GPT 4 to where we are right now. It's brilliant.
Yes.
No, so I think we've had such a lovely conversation, and without knowing it before we started, that we really, and that's why I love this show and getting people on the show, is because you think a person's so different from you because of their geography or their cultural context or their or the place they were born or the color of their skin or their gender, but the human experience does bring people together if you give it a chance.
I think so. And like, just to get back to what you were saying about, the way we communicate, right? Like if you and I followed each other online, we might kind of go, oh, I don't know how much I would have in common with that person. But because we have had the nuanced conversation and we have found the common ground, we understand like that we do have lots in common. And it's like, how does that happen online? I don't know, man. Like it's just
very difficult to I mean, I that's why I love long form, right? Because we spoke about your profession, but now we've gone way beyond that. And if it was 10 minutes, I doubt I'd even get to know who you are beyond your profession or your professional expression of work. It's amazing. Thank you, Martha. I really appreciate you taking the time. And so where can people, if they want to get your help with, I think you run a thing called Word Candy, right? Where you help people with your copywriting.
My business is, my copywriting business is called Word Candy, which is wordcandy.com.au. I'm also on LinkedIn under Martha Barnard-Rae, and I'm on Instagram at wordcandycoms. And I'm also working on a book.
Lovely.
So I'm excited about that. And because of the TEDx talk, I've had a lot of people kind of getting in touch about that. And so I've kind of got a little bit of a list for them of people who want to stay in touch about ADHD stuff. If anybody wants to know more about that, you can just ask me about it and I'll probably ask you for your email address and put you on the list. But it's, it's been really, really nice talking to you today.
And you, Martha, I really appreciate you taking the time and opening up and sharing your story, your journey, and your thoughts and opinions. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.